Here began in La Crosse, Wisconsin in 2015 with the aim to make hidden histories visible in public space. Under the direction of Dr. Michelle Hamilton and with support from graduate students in the Public History program at Western University, Here expanded to London, Ontario in 2018. Here is, to put simply, an ever-growing collection of stories about the everyday people who make up or who have historically made up our communities. Ariel Beaujot, the executive director of Here and a public historian at the University of Wisconsin-La Crosse, explains how Here works.
So Here is orange signs on street corners using city poles with phone numbers on them. When you call that number, you hear a story of the exact space in which you stand, and it's told by somebody that experienced that story. So it's not a historical placard read out over the phones. In fact, it's a story that could be told by you or me or anybody else about that space. I think of it as graffiti. Now, when you stay on the line, the phone line, you can leave a story about that space or any other space in the neighborhood. And in that way, the project becomes user-generated. So it becomes part of the community, and the community adds to it as we go along. There's lots and lots of stories, lots and lots of experiences at any given location. Call this number and you don't know what you're going to hear.
So today on Historia Nostra, we're talking about Here and thinking about how it democratizes history. In a lot of ways, Here differs from a more traditional, structured walking tour, mainly because the stories told when you call a Here number tend to fracture the narratives of progress that are pushed in traditional walking tours that tend to emphasize rich proprietors, founders, or politicians. Because Here stories are told from vastly different perspectives, cover different periods of time, and are drawn from oral histories, they tend to resist what has become known as the danger of the single story, as Dr. Beaujot says.
You really get a different take for what this community was about, and it's up to the listener to put it all together. Like our modern memories go, as opposed to a narrative sensibility, which is another part of our humanity, but it's a part of our humanity that erases a lot of the stories that we could tell, right? So we like to tell stories that have to do with arcs, that have a beginning, middle, and an end, especially in Canada, that have some kind of positive multicultural story at the end of them. And that's not the reality of most people's lived experiences. And so the fact that you don't know what you're going to get is key.
As time's gone on, both Here, La Crosse, and London have created historical walking tours. While historical walking tours were not part of Dr. Beaujot's original plan for Here or her vision for the project, they are a big part of how communities have adapted Here for their own uses. For example, Walter Zimmerman, a librarian emeritus at Western University, compiled oral histories from Black refugees available on the Here London website in order to create a walking tour for his family on Juneteenth a couple of years ago. Since then, he's also offered the tour as a virtual tour for friends and family during the pandemic. Dr. Beaujot explains some of the ways in which Here has changed since it began, based on how people have engaged with the project.
So the project has evolved a lot. It's based off of Murmur. So I was in touch a lot at the beginning with Sean McAuliffe, and he's actually the first person who ever reviewed the project. Who is one of the founders of Murmur in Toronto, which is essentially the same. It's the same sort of project. The back end of it is quite different, but to the user, it's the same. To the user, it's only you put in a phone number, you hear a story of the space that you're standing in. At first, as somebody said about Murmur, this was more like an Easter egg project, right? So like little children running around the day of Easter to try and find eggs, right? It was like a discovery project. You'll see a sign here, you'll listen to that, you'll see a sign somewhere else. Maybe you see that sign on your dog walk, and for a long time you don't call, and then eventually you call, that sort of thing. So it was a project like that originally. But there was also the website, and then there was brochures to do with it as well. Now, what ended up happening was, from there, what immediately happened was that we started to put tours that we developed for people that were coming to town, or tours that were created for special events in La Crosse and London. We started to create those, and in La Crosse, they're housed at the public library. So the public library has a site that you can get those tours from. And then here in London, it's through Driftscape that you can get those walking tour stories. So those exist. And then the other thing that we started to create, because we were getting called in by teachers, we were seeing that teachers started to use it, is that we started to create K through 12 curriculum for the project in Wisconsin. And it's also used for like scavenger hunts. There's all kinds of, like, I hear things all the time that weren't part of the intention, but I'm super excited that they're being used that way, especially because of my original intent, which is that this is graffiti on our city. It's just graffiti. And so you can use graffiti however you like, right? You can paint over it, ignore it, or you can take it up, you can add to it. I love it when I hear a sign gets a sticker on it or somebody tags it. I'm like, yep, that's how it should be. So I think that the more that people use it in different ways, it becomes so interesting to me. And I also think that the traditional walking tour doesn't do enough.
So to get a sense of how Here differs from traditional walking tours, I met up with a friend in London's Soho, or South of Horton neighborhood. We decided to take the Slavery and Freedom tour available on the Driftscape app because this video is coming out during Black History Month. This tour is slightly different than some of the others because it includes oral histories that were written down in the 1800s that are read by voice actors for Here, unlike most Here stories, which are told by a person who experienced them. But before we headed into the crisp January weather, we headed to Edgar and Joe's coffee shop in Horton, which is evidently also the location of a Here sign. From there, we headed off into the snow, and my accomplice might look familiar for those longtime viewers, but for those who are new here, I'll let her introduce herself.
Here are my coffees. Hi, I'm Liz. I'm a friend of Erin's, and I'm also a local public historian here in London, Ontario. And we are going to go on a little walking tour adventure today. We're actually going to explore some oral history about the fugitive slave population and community that was here in London's Soho neighborhood. Oh, there goes the camera. Good. Is this gonna be a video of the trash bin? Yeah. Perfect timing. Okay. Was that good? You want me to keep going?
Keep going.
All right.
What's your relationship to Here?
So I was actually on the Here team last year as part of my graduate program at Western University. So I worked really close with Dr. Beaujot, and we created a couple walking tours using our new app called Driftscape, which uses GIS and all sorts of great things. So that's what we'll be doing today. We're actually going to be using the app to explore all the different stops and listen to each story.
Cool.
Yeah.
And we have a very upset chihuahua.
Yeah. All right. Okay. So we are here at story number 14 with Here. And this is the first stop on our tour, and it's actually related to 198 Clarence, which we are just outside of right now. And this was actually once the home of Margaret Henderson, and according to our handy dandy app here, it tells us all about her story, and you can actually listen to a voice recording of a voice actor speaking her story as well, which is really cool.
Margaret Henderson came to London as a fugitive slave prior to the Civil War and moved with her husband to 198 Clarence Street in 1868. After her husband's passing, she worked as a laundress and continued to live at this location. Her story comes from Benjamin Drew's 1856 book, The Refugee, Narratives of Fugitive Slaves in Canada.
I was born of a slave mother in Washington, D.C., and raised in that city. I was to be set free at the age of 30. When my old mistress died, I was sold for the balance of the time to an Irish woman. When I first went there, I was the only slave they had ever owned. They owned afterwards a man, a woman, and a male child. The man went out to get someone to buy him. He left word at the grocery. The grocer was not particular to report the one who would purchase him to the old man by himself, but let on before the folks. This provoked the Irishman and his wife, and as the old man was taking out ashes from an ash hole, the master went down, and as the slave raised his head, the man struck him about the temple with a long-handled scrubbing brush. The old man never spoke afterwards. I saw the blow struck. The old man died the next morning. An inquest was held. I was afraid and told the jurymen I knew nothing about it. The white girl said the boss wasn't at home. She swore a false oath and tried to make it out that the old man fell and hit his head against the bake oven door. The man was bound over not to put his hand on a servant any more. Mistress used to pinch pieces out of the boy's ears and then heal them with burnt alum. She dared not do much to me, as my former owners were in the city and would not suffer barbarity. Her husband was under bonds of $2,000 to treat me well, but she treated the others so badly that some of my friends told me I had better leave. A friend to our plight was there then with some persons who were going to travel north with him, and I joined and came away. I like liberty, and if Washington were a free country, I would like to go back there. My parents were there. There are so many congressmen there that the slaves are not treated so badly as in other parts.
Our next stop is the location of the Hendersons' first house in London.
Okay, so for camera's reference, where are we?
Where are we? We're at 248
Gray Street.
Gray Street. This was the home of Frances Henderson.
One of the really cool things about Here is that while the stories are bound to a physical space, they are more about how a place was experienced rather than how it looked. So even as buildings are torn down or the context of a space changes, the Here stories can continue to exist there and will add context and meaning to that space that may otherwise be obscured. Dr. Beaujot gives some examples of this as pertains to queer space in La Crosse.
As we do more research on queer La Crosse, we find that a lot of those gay bars are gone. So like literally a gay bar will now be a parking lot, or a lesbian bar in North La Crosse is a parking lot now. So we can't nominate that building, it's gone. Even though we could nominate it according to the Heritage Preservation Commission rules, right? But it's gone. And then the other thing that's kind of interesting is there's gay bars that we have in La Crosse, like former gay bars, that became spaces where gay men and women were kicked out. Queer men and women were kicked out, and that's because of the history of that. Of the fact that it was a gay bar. So the remembrance of it is still there. And then if we put a sign up that indicates that, that really helps to show the kind of deeper history of those buildings. It's not just the bar that stands there now. It was this bar and this bar and this bar and this bar. And as you go back and you find that it was a gay bar, then the meaning of the space really changes, and the meaning of kicking people out of that space really changes, right? Because you're not just kicking them out of any space, you're kicking them out of a space that formerly was theirs.
As Dr. Beaujot says, part of the importance of a project like Here is that it creates awareness about the issues in the community and creates conversations that push for change when policy opportunities arrive. So even though the houses that the Hendersons once lived in are gone, Here shows how London's Soho neighborhood has changed since the 19th century, and also how it's changing now. Our last story from Here is from Janae Hodder about the first African Methodist Episcopal Church, which may soon be removed to the Pioneer Village in London.
My name is Janae Hodder. I am a heritage advocate and an active participant on the Fugitive Slave Chapel Restoration Project. I'm standing at 432 Grey Street in London, Ontario, and looking at an old building known as the Fugitive Slave Chapel. I just remember one afternoon in particular that we had a meeting. We had just selected the heritage architect and to help draw plans for the addition. And so we all got together, anyone who'd been on the committee, and met. It was a steaming hot day, July 29th, and we sat in a circle out behind under a tree. It was kind of led by John Rutledge, the architect, and he just wanted to go around, everybody say what their hopes were for the chapel. Everybody had these beautiful ideas about what should be done with the chapel, most of which are tied up in the concept of chapel as a learning place, promoting, talking about slavery, programming that might include slavery as it exists today, and it does in parts of the world and even in our own country.
However, as Dr. Beaujot explains, the potential for Here Here to raise awareness goes beyond heritage and conservation issues.
Once the problems in our communities are identified, we need to work to come up with some of the solutions for those issues. And that's what a project like Here Here is able to do, because it voices the stories of historically marginalized people so that people can hear those stories, get used to those stories, and then think about what they might want to do. So the beauty of Here Here is if you keep those stories up, and then whenever the moment is right and there's a policy window, there can be movement in that direction. And that's, the beauty is that the signs are in public and people are always listening to them. And this is a project that goes on for years, as opposed to things that are just on a website or live in a book or are basically less visible. And so they create less ability for more people to see them and less ability for change to happen. But the other part of this is that we have to make sure that we're protecting those who are telling the stories, right? So people can tell their stories anonymously if they choose. Anybody who tells a story that is too dangerous to them or that they feel too exposed about is welcome to, first of all, we have people listen to the stories before we put them up, but they're welcome to also ask for the stories to be taken down. We can easily take them down and they can disappear from the web and from the project. This is the importance of a project like this, is that everybody's voice can be included and should be included, no matter the sort of story they're telling.
Before we ended our call, I asked Dr. Beaujot what she envisions for Here Here in the future. Okay, so the future of Here Here is to expand to other parts of the globe. So I'll often consult at least once a month. I'll consult with somebody that's interested in doing a project like this. So right now the possibilities are a project in Luxembourg, Miami, and that one's interesting. It'll be in Little Havana, Little Haiti, so in these neighborhoods that are also getting gentrified partly because of climate change. Very interesting. That could be very interesting. Guelph, Ontario at the Arboretum, that one will certainly happen. And then Eau Claire in Wisconsin, they just have been in contact with me and it looks like that will be a go. So, and North La Crosse, which is still La Crosse, but North La Crosse is a very different neighborhood from the downtown area. And so it will reveal completely different stories about our community and the way that it functions, and allow us to study the community differently, and create policy for the community differently. So, and then I would say it will expand into various places over time, slowly, because it actually takes a long time to get it off the ground and a lot of grant money and so on. I wish that it costs less, but it doesn't. It costs a lot of money. So yeah, I see expansion. But then the other thing that I see is
more work in policy, more work for actual community change. Which is all about public historians and people involved with these projects realizing that it's not just a built heritage project, or it's not just a project where we're hearing stories from historically underrepresented people. It's a project where we're listening and we're doing something about the knowledge that we gain. And the other thing that my friend and I came up with this summer in terms of like future ideas for Here was queer here.
Oh, yeah.
Here, queer here. And we would, instead of doing signs, we could do like almost things that were scrawled on bathroom walls, right? Like, so that are queer, like, here for a good time, call this number, but for when you call that number, you're hearing a story from a queer person about a queer space, about their experience in a space, making it queer.
Mm-hmm. I love that.
Queering the space. Yeah. So there's lots of possibilities for this but we would want to use something that's less formalized, because that's what queer space is. It's less formalized. It becomes and then it retracts.
Yeah, there's I think one thing that has become clear through this interview has been that there's a lot of different ways that people are interested in using it, but also different potentials for this kind of service. For lack of a better word, I'm not sure if service is quite the right term, but it is doing a service for the community.
It could be a service. It could be a service.
Here is different from other types of historical walking tours or plaques because it tells stories in the words of the people who experienced them, can share many stories about a single site, and because the project focuses on under or unrepresented histories, the project adds meanings to spaces that are not otherwise readily seen. It's a way for underrepresented communities to reclaim space. To learn more about Here, check out the resources in the description. Special thanks to Dr. Ariel Beaujot and Walter Zimmerman for taking the time to speak with me, and to Liz Edwards and Dr. Michelle Hamilton. Our theme music is by Brook for Free. You can learn more at brookforfree.bandcamp.com.